Welcome to DevOps Toolkit, the channel where vision often takes precedence over execution. Most of the time, I split projects into two categories. It provides value and it is not good enough. However, every once in a while, a project comes along that produces both types of impressions. There are projects that show a lot of potential. Projects that might represent some important steps towards a better way to manage or operate systems. Yet those same projects might be showing the vision rather than being something we should adopt today. Such a vision could be huge, like for example Kubernetes, which was pretty horrible when it was first released, and at that time I did not recommend it to anyone. Yet its vision proved to be a valid one for all of us to pursue. The end result is what we have today. Almost everyone is using it, or at least planning to use Kubernetes in some capacity or another. It started as a vision that took a while to materialize. There are examples of projects that have much smaller scope, yet also started as this is not good enough today, but we can see where that might take us. One of such projects is, in my opinion, Kargo by Akuity. I think it has a lot of potential. It might be an important step forward in decoupling our workflows. It might be just what we need to orchestrate promotions of releases managed by GitOps, or to be more precise, Argo CD. The idea behind it is great, yet I'm not sure that there are enough compelling reasons to use it today. It's great, it truly is, yet something might be missing. You see, the problem that many of us are facing today are promotions of releases managed by GitOps tools like Argo CD, Flux, and others. That is the case in big part because GitOps broke our workflows. In the past, we were used to having a single workflow with, let's say, Jenkins or GitHub Actions or CircleCI or any other among dozens of similar tools. We were defining workflows that automate all, or at least part of our software development lifecycle, or SDLC. We would build stuff, we would run some tests, we would do static analysis, and whatever else needed to be done. That also included deployments. Jenkins or whichever other tool we used would at some point deploy a new release to a test environment, then it would execute some functional integration and other tests. From there on, we would deploy to some other environment and perform some other tasks, and such a process would continue all the way until a new release is running in production, with yet another round of tasks that should be executed afterwards. Then came GitOps and said, you know what? You should not be deploying stuff directly, but store the desired state in Git and let other tools that are completely unrelated with your pipelines do the synchronization. That broke workflows, and we failed to figure out a commonly used way to stitch them back together. We tried, but we shouldn't have probably wasted time. It was time to break the monolithic approach to workflows into smaller independent pieces that are loosely coupled and are operating independently of each other. It was time to start applying lessons learned from microservices into workflows. The problem is that I don't think we got there. There are many pieces missing, and the biggest one, in my opinion, is unwillingness to adopt event-based approach. More often than not, third-party apps we use today are failing to understand that they are not alone, but parts of a bigger ecosystem. Many tools are not equipped to receive signals and react. Now, that is really unfortunate, since we even built standards to do so. We have cloud events and CD events that are standards that define how processes can talk to each other without being coupled. Just as OpenTelemetry defined a standard for almost all observability so that all those tools can now play nicely with each other. Cloud events tends to do the same for communication between processes and tasks. Long story short, I'm on the lookout for tools that can do something very well, yet play nicely, and this is important, play nicely with the rest of the ecosystem so that I can plug them into it. That's why I got attracted to Kargo. It solves a real yet very specific problem. It can help us define promotions of our releases managed with GitOps. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that promotions do not work in isolation. We still need to build stuff and push stuff and test stuff and do whatever else needs to be done besides deployments themselves. Promotions are a part of SDLC. Now, this is important. Keep all that in mind while watching the rest of this video. Now, let's get back to Kargo. It's been a while since I discovered it and used it without planning to make a video about it. I was waiting for it to mature. That happened in October 2024 when it reached version 1. It is not alpha or beta anymore. It is, at least according to its maintainers, ready for prime time. So I will treat it as such. Specifically, there are 2 questions I will try to answer today. We'll try to figure out whether it solves a problem and whether it can be used together with the rest of the tooling we have in our systems. In other words, we'll see whether it is good at what it does, at promotions, and whether we can actually use it. So let's dig into it. I have a fairly simple application defined as Kubernetes customized. Most of the files are in the base directory. The environment-specific files are in overlays directories. For example, let's take a quick look at pre-prod customization YAML. We can see that it overrides ingress by setting the host to silly demo pre-prod. That way, the same application could run in different environments yet be accessible through unique hosts. Normally, I would have more customizations, like, for example, running a single replica in dev, but a minimum 3 replicas in prod. Nevertheless, that simple customization of the host should be enough for today's demo. As you can guess, I will be synchronizing the actuals to the desired state using Argo CD. More specifically, I have an application set that will do the heavy lifting. We can see that there are 3 stages: dev, pre-prod, and prod. So the application set will create 3 Argo CD applications. Each of them will have the desired state in a different branch stage, whatever the stage name is. I'm not fond of using branches for GitOps, but as you'll see later, those will not be branches you're used to. Kargo will do something very, very special with them. Finally, the resources of each app will be in a separate silly demo, whatever the stage name is, namespace. The important thing to note here is that I did not set the sync policy to be automated. As a result, Argo CD will not be syncing new commits to those branches automatically. We'll see later why is that so. Okay, now we can apply the application set and take a look at what we got. We can see that the sync status is out of sync. Argo CD detected that there is a difference between what's in those branches, but since we did not set the sync policy to be automated, it is not allowed to do anything. It detected a drift, but it is not reconciling it just yet. Now, I will assume that you are familiar with Argo CD, so I will not go deeper into Argo CD in this video. If that's not the case, there are 2 things I will say to you. First of all, be ashamed. Argo CD is one of the most important tools in the Kubernetes ecosystem. Second, once the shame wears off, go and watch the videos in the GitOps playlist and get familiar with the subject. The link to the playlist is in the description. Okay, now we are ready to explore Kargo. To understand Kargo, we need to understand a few different concepts, all represented by different kinds of resources. To begin with, we have a project. A project is a collection of other Kargo resources that, when combined, describe one or more delivery pipelines. Here's an example. There is not much happening over there since, as I already mentioned, a project is a way to group other resources. The only important thing to note is that in this example, there is a promotion policy that specifies that the stage dev should have auto-promotion enabled. As a result, as we'll see later, whenever there is a new release that matches certain criteria, Kargo will promote it to the dev environment automatically, right away. Okay, now let's apply the project before we move into other, arguably more interesting resources. The important thing to note is that a project is represented as a namespace. So let's confirm that by outputting all the namespaces in the cluster. And there we go. We can see that the namespace silly demo has been created. That's where the resources that define Kargo promotions will be living. That's their home. Now, before we proceed, we should create a secret with the credentials that will allow Kargo to interact with the Git repository where the manifests are. The only thing that matters related to the secret is that it needs to have the cred type label so that Kargo knows that's the secret with the credentials. And with that out of the way, we can now move to more interesting resources, starting with the warehouse. Think of warehouses as, well, warehouses. That's where we keep goods that are later on transported by freights. In the context of Kargo, a warehouse is where we keep our releases. Here's an example. That warehouse subscribes to releases that can be coming from Helm chart repos or Git repositories, or, as in this case, image repositories. Today we are subscribing to images in the silly demo repo, and we are interested only in 1x releases. That means that any release with semantic versioning starting from 1.0.0 all the way, but not included, to version 2. So if you make any release with major version 1, that release will be shipped into that warehouse. To be clear, there are many ways we can configure the range of releases we are interested in, and the only requirement is to use semantic versioning or semver. If you're not, you should use semver always. Anyways, I will leave the link to the semver rules in the description as well. Finally, the discovery limit specifies how many versions we are interested in. In this case, I see no reason to go back further than 5 versions in the past. Now that we saw how to fill a warehouse with releases, let's see how to define places where they should be delivered through Kargo stages. Typically, we would be delivering releases to environments, but Kargo prefers to call them stages. And that makes sense, since many of us associate environments with servers or clusters where we run specific versions of our applications. However, there can be many other definitions, like instances of specific versions of an application, infrastructure in different phases, and so on and so forth. Stages make more sense, since we are really talking about different phases through which we might need to pass until something is in production. And that something can be, well, anything. It could be a release of an application used for testing purposes. It could be a database running in production. It could be a cluster that we are upgrading and validating before we apply the same process to production, and so on and so forth. The important note here is that even though we will be using an application in today's examples, it can really be anything that needs to move through different stages until it reaches production. Here are definitions of a few stages through which we'll move our application. The first stage is called dev. That's a stage that should always have the latest release of the application that developers can use to experiment with whatever they're doing. We can see that it requests a freight from the warehouse silly demo. To deliver that release, we will use a promotion template with specific steps. First, we will clone the code from Git. We'll take whatever is in the main branch of the repo and create a branch stage dev. Next, we'll execute git clear to remove anything that might already exist in that branch. As you'll see later, Kargo tends to use branches in a very, very specific way that might be confusing at first, but it kind of makes sense once we get used to it. Next, since we're using customize today, we'll update image tag inside customize YAML stored in the customize base directory. That tag will be applied to the silly demo image. After that, we are building YAML from customize manifests. That part is important, since Kargo assumes that we might be defining our manifests through customize overlays or Helm templates or any other way, but that we want the desired state to be defined as pure YAML. I love that idea, since I believe that writing YAML is horrible and not flexible enough, yet having YAML as the final desired state is what we should do, since YAML alone, even though it might not be a good format to define something, is great to deduce what something is. Argo CD follows the same pattern, even though we might not be aware of it. When we give it, let's say, a Helm chart, it converts it into YAML before sending it to Kubernetes API. Kargo takes it a step further by storing that generated YAML in Git and instructing Argo CD to apply it. It's doing the conversion that Argo CD would normally do. Anyways, the final output will be stored as manifest YAML file in the specified branch. Further on, we are committing and pushing the manifest back to Git. Finally, we are instructing Argo CD to update Argo CD application silly demo dev. As you saw earlier, we configured the Argo CD application not to synchronize manifests automatically. This is the reason we did that. Kargo will initiate the sync at the end of the process. The other two stages are following the same pattern. The pre-prod stage uses dev as the source, meaning that only after we deploy the release to the development environment, it will become eligible for promotion to pre-production. The promotion template in this stage is mostly the same as in the previous one, except that the branch is different, that it will build the manifest based on the customization in the overlays pre-prod directory, and that we are this time updating Argo CD application silly demo pre-prod. The last stage is prod, which, as you can guess, should promote the release to production. It follows the same pattern as the previous two stages, so there's probably no need to go through it. One thing you should understand is that we are not limited to releases from a single warehouse. We could combine them if, instead of independently deployable microservices, we are working with distributed monoliths, while still calling them microservices. Anyways, let's apply all those manifests we explored and see the whole promotion process in action. We got a project and a warehouse. There is nothing special about those two beyond what we saw when we looked at the manifests. Stages, on the other hand, are much more interesting. We can see that the dev stage is already healthy and in the steady phase. That means that Kargo detected an image that matches our criteria and already instructed Argo CD to synchronize it into the cluster. That happened because we set inside the project the promotion policy for the dev stage to auto promotion enabled. As a result, Kargo, which is constantly monitoring, in our case, images from a registry, detected that there is at least one that matches the criteria and put it into the warehouse. Since the dev environment is set to auto promotion, it did just that. It promoted the latest release to the dev environment. We can see that's what really happened by listing all the promotions in a silly demo namespace. And there we go. There it is. The promotion to the dev stage was indeed created automatically. As a result, we should have all the resources that belong to the application running in the silly demo dev namespace. And there they are. We can even confirm that the application is indeed running by sending a request to it. A truly interesting and a unique way Kargo handles promotions can be observed by taking a look at the manifest YAML file in the stage dev branch of the repository. We can observe three important things. First, Kargo created a pure YAML manifest made specifically for that environment. It's not customized that we have in the main branch. Instead, it built it into YAML. If we used Helm, it would do the same. It would convert it into YAML. That's probably the part I like the most about Kargo. One of the reasons we use GitOps is the ability to observe the desired state. If in its final form, it would be in Customize or Helm or whichever other format we might be using, it could be hard to deduce what the intention is. We would need to do a mental calculation or exercise of applying patches and overlays in case of Customize, or deducing what would be the output of all the conditionals and loops and variable substitutions in case of Helm, or something similar in some other format. This way, we get the best of both worlds. We get to keep defining what we want in whichever format we like using, as long as it's supported by Kargo, which is not necessarily the case, and we get a nice and clean YAML with the final desired state. That is something I've been doing for a while now, but without Kargo. If, for example, I'm using GitHub Actions to build images, run tests, and do whatever else I'm doing in my CI/CD processes, I would, at some point, execute customize build, or Helm template, or KCL run, or whatever the command is to convert my stuff into YAML, store it in Git, and once I do that, let Argo CD do the rest. Kargo does the same, but in a separate branch. Speaking of branches, the second thing we can observe is that manifest YAML is the only file in that branch. It's not a clone of the main branch, it has nothing to do with it. It's only a place where the whole desired state is defined in a single file. Finally, even though we cannot observe that just yet, Kargo always wipes the branch clean before it generates the manifest. It does not disrupt the main branch in any form or way. All in all, this is a very unusual usage of branches, and I'm not even sure that it makes sense, yet it works somehow. But that's not all. There's another concept we did not yet explore. There are freights. Just as real freights transport goods from one place to another, cargo freights are a sort of meta artifacts that transition releases from the warehouse to stages. Since we saw that one release is already running in the dev environment, we should be able to see it. For now, we have only one freight, since only one release was transported to one of the environments. Now, let's take a look at the status of that freight by retrieving its name and storing it into an environment variable and using that variable to get that freight and output the status. We can see that for now, that freight has been verified only in the dev environment. Now, let's imagine that we are happy with that release and that we would like to promote it to the pre-production environment for some, let's say, serious testing. To do that, first we need to log in into Kargo running in the cluster. Okay, Now we can execute cargo promote, specify the project, the freight that already delivered that same release to the dev environment, and the stage where we want it, which in this case is pre-prod. And that's it. We manually promoted the release that was running in the dev environment to pre-production. And we can confirm that's truly the case by listing all the promotions in the silly demo namespace. We can see that the pre-prod promotion succeeded. We should be able to see the details of that promotion by describing the resource. However, there is one really annoying thing about it. Kargo does not set any labels in the promotions it is generating, so we cannot execute something like kubectl describe with -- selector to select the one we need. Labels are the cornerstone of all Kubernetes resources. We use them in all sorts of ways, one of them being the ability to select or filter resources we're interested in. Kargo maintainers did not bother adding them, so we have to do silly workarounds like copy the promotion name from the previous output, paste it as the value of an environment variable, and use it to describe that specific promotion. Silly. Now, the good news is that the output of the promotion provides all the important information we might need. We can see which freight was involved in the promotion, which stage it was promoted to, and which steps were executed to get us there. If you take a look at the status, we can see which image digest was used, what the repo URL is, what the image tag is, and so on and so forth. Finally, there are events depicting what happened and when it happened. If you ever need to deduce how was a release created, where it was deployed, which tag it was used, or anything else related to a specific release in a specific environment, the promotion resource is where you will find the information. And that's it. The release was promoted from dev to pre-production, and we can now run tests or do whatever else we need to do to gain confidence we might need to promote it to production. Or not. If we do indeed decide to promote it to production, all we have to do is execute another cargo promote command, just as we did before, but this time set the stage to prod. And that's truly it. We are done. At least when the first release is concerned. We started with the automatic promotion to the development environment, and from there on, promoted it manually to pre-production and production. Now, I should probably say that Kargo comes with a web UI, which is nothing special yet. If you like pretty colors, you can use it to see essentially the same information we've been observing from the terminal, just in a more colorful way. It even allows us to create resources directly from the UI, and by doing that, contradicting itself when stating that it's a GitOps tool, since those resources will be created directly in the cluster, completely bypassing Argo CD for, in my opinion, no good reason other than we did not bother adding the ability to push manifests of those resources to Git. That could be the only reason. Now, to be honest, I feel that we do not need yet another dashboard dedicated to a very specific part of the overall SDLC process. I would be much happier if Kargo extended Argo CD UI, especially since the tool itself is tightly coupled to it anyway. From now on, all we would have to do is build and push new images, and Kargo, with the setup we used in this demo, will be releasing those images, those applications, those releases automatically to the development environment and waiting for us to promote it manually to others. Okay, now that we saw Kargo in action, let's do a bit of trash talk. I love the idea behind Kargo. It's fantastic, yet it makes very strong assumptions. It's as if it thinks that the only tool people use in their development workflows is Argo CD. If that would be the case, Kargo would make a lot of sense. However, that is not the case. Let me explain. When we make changes to code, we tend to run workflows that run unit tests, build and publish artifacts, deploy those artifacts to one environment, run some tests, do something else, deploy to some other environment, execute more tasks, and so on and so forth. All the way until a release is running in production, and we start observing how it behaves. Now, keep that in mind when you try to answer the following questions. How will you run tasks that should be run after Kargo promotes a release to an environment? Will you execute Kargo promote and then go to GitHub Actions, Jenkins, or whichever other workflow tool you're using to execute whatever you need to execute to, let's say, validate that the new release is performing as expected? Is that what you'll do? Since Kargo is not sending any events to anyone, execution of that workflow would need to be performed manually. And if that's the case, we can just as well add promotion logic into the workflow. It's not really hard to execute YQ to modify a tag in a manifest and push it back to Git so that Argo CD does the synchronization. Here's another question. Once, let's say, you run tests that confirm that the release is ready for production, how will you execute promotion with Kargo? If those tests are executed through a workflow, isn't it easier to, again, run YQ to modify the manifest describing production than to stop the workflow, fire up a terminal, and execute, Kargo promote again? Now, you might say that you will execute Kargo promote commands from your workflows. But how will you find out what the auto-generated name of the promotion is? Remember, there are no labels that can help us filter what we need through kube control selectors. What I'm trying to say is that there are some operations we need to perform before and after promotions, and Kargo does not offer hooks we could use to trigger it, or hooks that could be fired from Kargo to trigger some other workflows. Kargo was not designed to play nicely with tools we might be using. The only assumption it makes is that we have Argo CD and nothing else. It's not even trying to play together with Argo workflows, which is in the same family of projects. Another critique is that defining steps required for each stage is not much better or even simpler to write than performing similar operations through whichever workflow tool you might be using. Kargo is essentially replacing YQ and Git commands. Normally, I would not consider that as a downside, since Kargo brings structure and predefined process to otherwise random shell commands that we are executing from workflows. That's a good thing, but only if it would assume that there are workflows, which it doesn't. Here's what I would like Kargo to do besides the things it is already doing. I would want Kargo to be able to subscribe to events and to publish events. That could be to Nuts or any other pub/sub messaging server. If it would do that, I could, for example, execute a workflow that does whatever it does, and when it reaches a part that would normally promote release to an environment, just publish an event which would be picked up by Kargo and initiate a promotion. Similarly, I would like Kargo to publish events indicating that promotions are done, so that workflows can subscribe to them and execute whichever tasks we would normally have to run to test those promotions or whatever else we might be doing. What I'm trying to say is that Kargo tries to solve only a small part of development lifecycle. Promotions cannot be considered something that runs in isolation, but a part of a much bigger process. As such, Kargo must provide ways to be plugged into that lifecycle. It cannot assume that all we are doing is promoting releases. Those hooks or integrations or whatever you want to call them need to be a part of it and need to be documented. Otherwise, I honestly do not know how to integrate Kargo into what we're doing in a way that it provides a return of investment. Okay, enough critique. Now we can there will be more critique. Now we can jump into my favorite section and talk about pros and cons. Let's start with negatives, with cons. And the biggest issue is that there are no integrations with workflow tools beyond simply executing Kargo promote commands, which pose difficulties by themselves. I'm not sure how those integrations should look like, but I'm sure that there should be a way to trigger a promotion after some tasks were executed, and that some other tasks might need to run after a promotion is finished. What else? Oh, documentation. Documentation is bad, like really bad. Quick start, for example, does not work. At least not at the time of this recording. For example, the stages in the quick start are not set correctly. So all three of those showcased over there are using the same stages/test branch or customized directory actually. At the end of the quick start, it says, we leave it as an exercise to the reader to use the dashboard to progress the freight from test to user acceptance tests and again from UAT to production. That won't work, since services in all three environments will try to use the same port and fail. If you don't believe me, I dare you to do what Quick Start says and do the exercise. It won't work. It simply won't, unless the Quick Start is rewritten by the time you watch this. That's not the only issue in the documentation, but a symptom that shows that not enough attention was put into it. It's not easy to deduce what each part of the specs is used for. There are not enough examples of different use cases, and so on and so forth. The documentation is very barebone and limited to the minimum, absolute minimum, without even being tested or tried out by the authors. Now, I would not be so negative on the documentation for such a young project. However, the maintainers chose to promote it to version 1. It's supposed to be mature and stable. I don't think that is the case, and I would consider Kargo beta at best. Still, if it's version 1, it should be treated as such. What else? Oh yeah, I'm not sure I'm sold on Kargo's usage of branches that contain only the build manifest. I'm not sure that's a better choice than simply using a separate repository. Those branches are not related to the mainline anyway. I assume that that's not the only way we can use Kargo, but it is not clear from the documentation that other ways are possible or what the other ways are. Branches also lead me to the next closely related issue. Kargo is very, very opinionated. That's not necessarily a bad thing for everyone. Some might benefit from a tool that tells them that there is one way and only one way and no other way to do something. However, many of us are already using Argo CD for a while now, and I feel that a higher level of flexibility is needed to fit Kargo into existing workflows and organization. Kargo is effectively doing the same job as a workflow would do, including Argo workflows. It is a set of steps that are executed sequentially. That's not necessarily a bad thing, quite the contrary, except that it messes up with other steps in our workflows, those not directly related to promotions. In other words, Kargo is a separate workflow that does not fit into existing workflows, yet it cannot avoid them. I also have an issue with Kargo calling itself multi-stage GitOps continuous promotion, even though GitOps is not applied to it in any formal way, at least not in the documentation. The docs instruct us to install Argo CD, cool, but then use kubectl apply to install the rest, including resources we explored in this video. Shouldn't Argo CD set up everything required to use Kargo if Kargo is GitOps continuous promotion tool? It's a GitOps tool with documentation that ignores GitOps. It's a bit strange, right? All in all, I think that most of my issues come from Kargo promoting itself as version 1 while it should be beta at best, maybe even alpha. It's a relatively young project and there is nothing wrong in it being alpha or beta for a while longer until the community figures out what it really is. If it wasn't promoted to version 1, I would not even talk about pros and cons, but about the idea behind it, and the idea is great. We need a tool like Kargo. We need a way to manage promotions in a more GitOps friendly way. So, if you choose to ignore the claims that it is ready, that it is version 1, that it is ready for production, you can just as well ignore all my cons, all my negatives. Okay, now let's jump into good stuff, into pros. And to begin with, there is promotion itself with its predefined steps. I see it as an attempt to have standardized promotions, and we need that instead of each of us fiddling with IQ commands in our workflows. There is a need for something like that, hence there is the need for Kargo. The next great thing is the visibility. With Kargo, we have almost complete visibility at what was promoted, where it was promoted, when it was promoted, which steps were executed in the promotion, and so on and so forth. We can have that information by inspecting Kargo's custom resources as well as through the web UI. The latter is something I'm really not happy about, since I would want to see the information about promotions either in lifecycle workflows or, if that's not an option, in Argo CD itself. Having a separate UI only for promotions means that the visibility is not very visible in the context of everything else we're doing. Still, I'm giving this one thumbs up with a note that I expect it to integrate its data into other tools. Finally, there are guardrails. Being able to define what can be promoted and under which conditions is great, especially when promoting manually. The guardrails like that are not as useful in the scenarios where everything is automated, but that's not the goal of Kargo. It is, in my opinion, designed for those who want to perform some, if not all, promotions manually. And in those scenarios, guardrails are essential. All in all, I think that Kargo is off to a great start. And I can imagine it growing to a very important and very useful project, especially for those practicing GitOps. However, it's not there yet. We have what I would consider an early beta implementation that should serve as a starting point of a vision that is not accomplished just yet. It is not mature just yet, in spite of the fact that it claims otherwise. It's a great start, don't get me wrong. I love how it started and I'm eager to see where it will go from here. Now, before we leave, let me give you an important note. My judgment of Kargo is based exclusively on the open source version of it. Kargo is also a part of the Akuity platform where some, if not all, of my concerns might have been addressed. I don't know, and do not judge me for judging only Kargo open source. Check out Akuity, they might have solved all my grievances with Kargo. I don't know, I haven't tried it out. Thank you for watching, see you in the next one, cheers.